Hello and welcome back to Park Fermi Parlay with Kieran Downey. It is finally time for the 2024 F1 Driver Ratings End of Year Edition. That is right, we have done 24 races around the world. We have seen drivers dropped, we've seen champions crowned, and it is time to get into our driver ratings for 2024. And we are going to be going through all 24 drivers that have raced this year. That includes Oliver Bearman, Jack Doohan, Franco Colapinto, Liam Lawson, Daniel Ricciardo, Logan Sargeant. Now, we did obviously do our mid-season ratings, and Logan Sargeant did one race after the summer break, and Daniel Ricciardo obviously did a few, but I thought we'll include them anyway because we want to do their whole performance that they've had this year. So we're going to kick things off. This is going to be a two-parter because we've got quite a few to get through. So we're going to do 13 drivers for part one and 11 drivers for part two. That is just because the way the drivers have split, if I was to do 12 and 12, I would be splitting the Alpine boys right down the middle, and I didn't see the sense in doing that. So we're going to do 13 drivers for part one, 11 drivers for part two. Now, you guys have had your say. You guys have voted every single driver what you think their performance was out of 10. I have also voted, so we're going to get into my ratings, your guys' ratings, and go through every single driver from this year, kicking things off with Kevin Magnussen. Now, I am giving K-Mag 5 out of 10. And so are you guys. The fans also gave K-Mag a 5 out of 10. Now, I will say, I was kind of on edge about what to give Magnussen because he probably has had one of the most roller coaster years. Now, I was on the edge about what score I kind of wanted to give K-Mag, and I thought, actually, do you know something? A 5 out of 10, I think, perfectly describes K-Mag's season. I don't think you could go any higher because he's had such mental low points. And I don't think you could go any lower because he has had some great moments. He is obviously bidding farewell to Formula One for what is probably the final time. He's going off to the Endurance Championship, I believe, with BMW. And if there is one thing you could say about K-Mag, it is probably that he is uncompromising. He left everything out on the racetrack. There was never a moment where I thought K-Mag's not giving it his all. Whether that was his mad defending in Saudi Arabia, where he managed to back up the entire lower half of the field to allow his teammate to go and score points. It was insane, and a lot of people thought that shouldn't be able to happen, but that is Formula One for you. Now, who'd have thought it would get any worse than that? It did. Miami was terrible. At that point, I was actually firmly over the antics of K-Mag. He did some pretty dodgy defending against Lewis Hamilton, the whole incident with Logan Sargeant, and I kind of left Miami with a little bit of a sour taste in my mouth towards K-Mag. Then it got even worse when we went to Monaco, and I stand firm that I do not believe that 100% of the blame is on K-Mag for his incident with Sergio Perez. However, I do put a solid 75% onto K-Mag. I have been hung out to dry online for that. I have faced quite a bit of backlash from a lot of the fans for saying that I believe it is a lot of solely K-Mag's fault. I do retract that, and I do put some of the blame onto Perez. However, I left Miami and I left Monaco, and I was completely over it, and I was, shocked at some of the decisions from the FIA that he wasn't getting a race ban after Monaco, and I was so over K-Mag, but then he just wormed his way back into my heart with just some great drives towards the end of the year, and it was clear that he wasn't getting his contract renewed, and he was going to go out with an absolute bang, and my God, he did when he got a race ban in Azerbaijan. I had to sit Azerbaijan out, watch it on the telly, and I thought, my God, he's going to come back with no penalty points and a clean license, no contract for next year, and he's just going to go hell for leather. And he came back with I would say, a slightly different mindset, that he wanted to score points. He didn't want to be the driver that was known for all these mad, crazy things. So he went out and he was scoring points and he was performing decently, obviously missing Brazil because of an illness, and I think maybe those final few races and the fact that he wasn't getting a seat sort of just pulled at the heartstrings that I couldn't give him any worse than a 5. And I have to say that one thing you can say about K-Mag is he will not change for anyone. As I said, he had an uncompromising race style that cost him so many penalty points that he picked up a race ban. And even when he came back after his ban, he was not changing his style for anyone. Not the real book, not for anyone. And I kind of admire that. So I am fairly happy to lock in a 5 out of 10 for Magnussen. And it was a memorable final season for him. And as I said, you guys also, a 5 out of 10. Magnussen also finished the championship in 15th position with 16 points. All right, next up is his teammate Nico Hülkenberg, who I have given a 7 out of 10, and the fans have also given a 7 out of 10. There's actually quite a few, spoiler alert, there's quite a few of these drivers where we've agreed, me and you guys have agreed on the performance out of 10 for these drivers, and I do think Nico is a 7 out of 10. I have to say that this has been a great season for Nico, and I think it has showed why Audi was so keen to get him on board. Obviously, it is a lovely thing to have a German driver and a German team, and he really wanted to race for Audi. However, I think if you'd had Haas in 2023, they would have maybe not been so keen to take him on. However, with Haas under new leadership, getting better and better and better, Hulk showing why he is a deserving driver of an F1 spot, it only but makes sense that Audi want him in the car in 2026 when they take over the Sauber team. He became, he gave Charles Leclerc a run for his money for being known as Mr. Saturday. His qualifying performances were amazing, and he was regularly able to back up his qualifying performance on a Saturday with scoring points. And I've made no secret of the fact that I've been loving Nico Hülkenberg scoring points, and I will be thoroughly upset when he moves to Sauber if they've not improved the performance of that car to allow him to continue scoring for points. I want him. He's showing he is capable. That qualifying in Abu Dhabi, sticking at P4, unfortunately taking a grid penalty to start the race P7. But I want him on the podium. I want him potentially to finish a race P1. I want him to win a race. I want him on the podium. I really like the guy, and he finished 5 of the last 7 races in the points. And he's 37, and I just think he's aging like a fine wine. And when we talk about drivers getting old and their performance sort of dripping away, and you know, there's been all this talk about Lewis Hamilton, who's going to be turning 40, and his performance is waning. Nobody says that about Nico Hülkenberg. He's 37, and he's getting better. Like, come on, Hulk. I do feel for him a little bit because he was spearheading Haas high. Like, he was hauling Haas up the Constructors' Championship, and had it not been for Alpine's performance at Brazil, he would have secured them, near enough single-handedly secured them a P6 in the Constructors' Championship. I think it's been a phenomenal season for Nico Hülkenberg, and it's been brilliant to watch, and I'm excited to see his future with Audi. I just hope and pray for 25 that Sauber have sorted their shit out and can give him some kind of decent car to sort of go on and secure some points. So yeah, 7 out of 10 from myself and from you guys as well. The fans going with a 7 out of 10. Nico Hülkenberg also finished the championship P11 with 41 points. Okay, next up is rookie sensation, and I will continue to call him that, Oliver Bearman, who I am giving a 7 out of 10. And you guys are actually kind of split on it. About half of you went for a 6 out of 10, and the rest went for a 7 out of 10. There's a few other ones in there, but they're very, very low. The majority of you were split between a 6 out of 10 and a 7 out of 10. I have to say, we've obviously only got 3 races to base Oliver on. He obviously replaced Carlos Sainz in Saudi Arabia, replaced Kevin Magnussen in Azerbaijan, and replaced him again in Brazil. However, I have to say, for those 3 races, I have been incredibly impressed by Oliver Bearman. In Saudi Arabia, I would say one of the hardest tracks across the entire year. It is fast, it is incredibly tight. It is fast, it's incredibly tight. I watch that race and I'm constantly like, oh, the drivers are so close to the wall. And how there is not more accidents on that track, I have no idea. And for it to be his first time racing competitively in F1 machinery, for him to come in at such a late stage, because Carlos Sainz has had to drop out because he's obviously got appendicitis, for him to come in, do FP3 into qualifying, into a race, and finish P7, honestly, at that point, I was like, sign him up. Sign him up. Sign him up. It was amazing. Then he obviously went back to Formula 2. His Formula 2 timeline this year has not been that great. He's obviously had some race wins in there, but I wouldn't say he was the most impressive driver. And then Azerbaijan comes around. Kevin Magnussen's gotten his race ban. Oliver Behrman has to step in. And again, scores points in an incredibly difficult track. Mighty impressed. Sign him up. I think was he already signed then? I think he might have already been signed on. I can't remember when exactly they signed him up. But I was like delighted. And then Brazil, and he steps in for Kevin Magnussen. He's only going to be taking the first part of the weekend because K-Mag is ill. K-Mag can't come back, so Oliver does the whole weekend in what is probably one of the most difficult races he may ever do. I don't know. Depends how Mother Nature feels in the future. But to go into such a weather-affected weekend where qualifying is pushed back, to get up super early, to go qualifying, and then race on the same day in those conditions and bring the car home P12 with so many crashes and do not starts, disqualifications. It was a mental weekend, and he was terrified. I've heard the radio messages. He was terrified. He thought he was going to crash the car, and it is a situation I would wish on nobody to drive in those kind of conditions. But like, he's just been so impressive, and I can't give him any higher because it's only been 3 races. And I do think that he is worthy of a 7 out of 10, I have to say. I can't give him a 10 because he's not had a 10 out of 10 performance. I do think a 9's a bit high, and I do think an 8, potentially if he'd had more races, I think a 7 is the best. And I guess I said, you guys are mostly split between a 6 and a 7, but very, very great outing. Those 3 races, phenomenal for Oliver Behrman. Very excited to see what he can do for Haas next year. Oliver Behrman also finished P18 in the championship with 7 points. He's the first driver in history to score points for 2 different constructors in the same year. And in those 3 races, he outperformed in the championship Logan Sargeant, Zhou Guanyu, Valtteri Bottas, Liam Lawson, Franco Colapinto, all of these men who have either done full seasons, just over half a season, or twice the amount of races that Oliver Behrman did. So what an absolutely incredible 3 races that man had. All right, next up is Zhou Guanyu. I've given him a 3 out of 10. I have swapped him and Valtteri Bottas's points slightly, because I did actually have them ever so slightly different. I've given him a 3 out of 10. The fans, you guys, have also given him a 3 out of 10. He has had somewhat of an interesting Formula 1 career in it being fairly poor, and I would say has only just managed to save face this year by being Sauber's only point scorer of the season by finishing 8th in Qatar. Apart from that, it has been awful. This campaign this year has been terrible. It's actually been like I've got no words. I have been so bored. I think I've experienced every negative emotion watching Zhou Guanyu's 2024 campaign. It has been boring. It has been frustrating. Like, at one point, I think I was just shouting for him to do something, anything. And like, I actually had a little bit of I had high hopes for the drivers, because when they started, the drivers were doing pretty well. I mean, Zhou Guanyu was finishing 11th. It was Sauber I had the issue with. Sauber were having 40-second pit stops and ruining their drivers' chances of actually being further up the field. And then Sauber kind of worked their kinks out, in that department, and it's almost like both the drivers got worse. The car is obviously a complete dustbin, and I actually feel bad for those two boys having to drive that neon green combine harvester. But just at every single race, I have, even when I've had no hope for them, but even when I've had just a little bit of hope, it's been dashed. It's been done, sorry. Like, every single moment has just, every race, if I had hair, I'd have pulled it out. Honestly, I've got nothing else to say about him. It was a terrible campaign for him. As I said, he has just managed to save face by being the only point scorer in that team. I genuinely was shocked when he scored points. And do you know something? When he scored points, I was so happy for him. Everybody was so happy for him. But actually, I don't feel bad that he's lost his drive. I actually don't. Because there was no signs of progress from him. There was no signs of actually getting better. It was just qualifying at the back every race, finishing at the back every race. It was just boring. And I don't believe he should have gotten a seat for 2025. There's no way anybody could have hired him. I'm really sorry. He's rumoured to be in line for a Ferrari reserve driver role for 25, but I do believe that's probably as good as it gets for him in Formula One. I don't think he'll ever be a full-time Formula One driver again. So I am happy to... I think those points that he scored are the only reason I've given him a 3. Genuinely, I think it's the only reason I've given him a 3. He finished the championship P20 with 4 points. At least he wasn't last. Like, I can't. You guys also think he was a 3 out of 10, so I don't feel too bad giving him a bad grade. Valtteri Bottas, I'm kind of swaying with what to give him. And it's not going to be what you guys have given him, because you guys have actually given him a higher grade than what I plan on giving him. Part of me wants to give him a 4 because he was faster than Zhou Guanyu. Part of me also wants to give him a 2 because he was the only driver that didn't score points. Well, sorry, the only driver to do the full season and not score points. But that also feels harsh because he was faster. I'm going to give him a 4. I'm going to give him a 4 out of 10. No, I can't. I actually can't in good conscience give him a 4 out of 10. I'm going to give him a 3 out of 10. Maybe a 3.5. A 3.5 out of 10 is for Valtteri Bottas. You guys, the fans, have given him a 5 out of 10. His season was actually worse than Zhou Guanyu's because, as I said, he was the only driver to complete the full season and not score points. Everyone else that's not scored points has not done the full 24 races. It does seem wild that he couldn't score points because he was the faster of the two Sauber drivers. He is a good driver. We know that from his era at Mercedes. And I honestly think if the car had been ever so slightly better, he could have scored points. Obviously, he had a chance to do it in Abu Dhabi, but a collision with Perez at the race restart after the safety car and a huge lockup bringing him into the side of Magnussen meant he had to retire from the race. So it was there. The signs showed he could have done it, but it just wasn't in the cards. And I can't think of any other moment. Like, his season was just meh. And actually, the most memorable achievement of Valtteri Bottas's entire F1 season was that he completed an Ironman triathlon in his own home. And that tells you everything you need to know about Valtteri Bottas's F1 season. On track, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. It was, again, fairly boring to watch. Listen, he insists he's still got something to give to the sport. It's obviously not enough to convince a team to give him a full-time seat. He's obviously going to be Mercedes reserve driver. I feel bad for Valtteri. I hope he has a lovely time at Mercedes. I don't know if we'll see him on track throughout 25. And, you know, potentially there is obviously Cadillac coming in 26. They might be looking at Valtteri Bottas as one of their driver lineup, but they sort of have quite a big pick. They've got the likes of Perez, Bottas, potentially Ricciardo, although he has sort of alluded to the fact that he is completely over F1 and has had quite the social media clearance, actually. Come on to him in a second, but listen, I feel bad for Bottas. He's just been stuck in an absolute dustbin all year. I just can't score him less than Zhou Guanyu because he has actually, on a whole, had a better season, just hasn't scored any points. So yeah, I'm going to stick with a 3.5 out of 10. You guys have given him a 5 out of 10. Bottas also finished the championship 22nd with 0 points. He's actually finished 22nd in a 20-car sport. Obviously, there has been replacements throughout the year, but Bottas is the only driver in those 21, 22, 23, 24 that completed a whole season. The rest of them are all parts of a season, and he's finished. Oh, honestly, I can't talk about it. It makes me upset. All right, next up is Daniel Ricciardo, and I am giving Daniel 5 out of 10. I'm going with a 5 out of 10. You guys have given him a 4 out of 10. And I mean, when we did our mid-season ratings, I think we pretty much covered the majority of what Daniel Ricciardo's season has been. Daniel Ricciardo's return was very, very poor on the whole, to be quite frank with you. He had a season that was filled with disappointment, lackluster performance, and criticism. And whenever the criticism of him got a little bit too harsh, a la the Danica Patrick situation in Miami and the Jacques Villeneuve situation in Canada, he then would go on and score some points. Obviously, in Miami, it was a P4 in the sprint. I believe it was P4. And in Canada, it was a P8 in the race. And had he had those kind of performances more, he may have been able to stay in the sport. There was no... I don't think anyone was under the illusion that, you know, he was there for any other reason than to impress the Red Bull bosses by beating Yuki Tsunoda to go on and replace Sergio Perez. This was always going to be Sergio Perez's last year in Formula One. Daniel Ricciardo was always going to be replacing Perez. I know that Perez signed his contract after Miami before we came into the European races, but it just always seemed to be that Ricciardo was heading back to Red Bull, and all he needed to do was beat Yuki Tsunoda, and he couldn't. He just couldn't beat Tsunoda. And I have to say that Daniel's performance out with the Miami and the Canada, every other race where he performed pretty poorly, all that did was give the Red Bull hierarchy more and more of a reason to see more value in getting a look at Liam Lawson than allowing Daniel to finish the full season. Red Bull obviously just seemed that there was no use in continuing with Daniel anymore. That his time was over. What they needed to do was get Liam Lawson in the car, see how he performed back in the sport. Obviously, he only did 5 races in 23. Get him back in, see how he is before they moved him up to Red Bull because Perez was on the out as well. I don't know whether it was a lack of suitability for this kind of generation of cars. I don't know whether it was a loss of speed. I don't know whether it was a loss of interest in competing in Formula One, even though he came back into this year and it felt like he was ready to really get back to Red Bull, and I think that's what he kind of really wanted, and it obviously didn't go his way, but now it seems that he's pretty happy to just be done with Formula One, and it does feel like his F1 career is over for good this time around. I don't think we'll see him back. He seems to be pretty happy doing his thing. He's got his Enchante, he's got his DR wines, he's doing something with the Buffalo Bills. He seems pretty content in what he's doing, and it was a very awkward farewell for a very popular F1 driver. As I said, he was only able to sort of show pace in momentary flashes, and the rest of the time, majority, it was just piss poor. I actually feel incredibly bad for him that his exit was what his exit was. When you look at the exits that, okay, I don't think you can compare him in V-Carb to Lewis Hamilton Mercedes, but Hamilton's big farewell. Even Perez leaving Red Bull got such a lovely send-off from the team with videos with Max and, you know, all these different montages and clips and photos, and it was a whole big to-do before they got Lawson in. And now listen, Perez was dumped on the night, and the following morning Lawson was announced. Daniel was dropped and Lawson was announced the same day. I mean, to be fair, the timing is probably the same amount of time, but it was very fast. And for a man that has given so much to the sport, we've been through all of this. There was an entire video obviously dedicated to it, but it was an awkward and it was a bit of a poor farewell for Daniel Ricciardo, and it's a shame that his final season was what it was. Yeah, just not great. He obviously finished the championship 17th, with 12 points, and I'm sticking with a 5 out of 10. You guys, the fans, have given him a 4. All right, next up is Daniel Ricciardo's replacement, Liam Lawson, who I'm giving a 4 out of 10. Giving him a 4, and you guys, the fans, have also given him a 4. Now, as was his sort of short cameo in 23, he was brought in to replace Daniel Ricciardo. Obviously, 23 just being because Ricciardo broke his hand. This year because they fired Daniel. And he did the final 6 rounds of the season. He, what I will say, showed confidence to really take a fight to the front of the pack. Was not afraid to go up against the big dogs, your Alonsos, your Perez's, that kind of stuff. And he showed potential. Now, we know he's obviously been fast-tracked into the Red Bull seat. I've made my feelings on that clear in my video about Perez and Lawson, about Perez being dumped, and in another video that will be coming out with our sort of review and reaction to the full 2025 driver lineup. I like Liam Lawson, but I sometimes don't like his attitude. His battles with Perez and Alonso quickly lost the excitement, where I thought this could be quite a fun battle that we'll see these two battling it out on track, and it became more petty bitchiness over the radio, where, you know, he constantly nitpicked on Perez, and his race engineer was like, just go and just focus on your own race. And he did the same with Alonso, and it was actually a little bit embarrassing for him. I kind of got really bored of the nonsense. And hey, listen, I wish him all the best at Red Bull. I've already recorded my 2025 grid reaction, but I do not believe that Liam Lawson will be a long-term Red Bull driver. I think he's there for the short term. He's a quick plug whilst they get younger talent up into that team. I don't think he'll be there for long. I believe he may make it out the full 2025 season, but I do not believe he is the driver that he maybe thinks, or that it was previously believed to be, that he will be the one to lead the Red Bull team. He is, I fully believe he's just there to bide some time, shall we say. Lawson finished the season 21st in the championship with 4 points. A very respectable points haul for 6 races, coming in at the very end of the season when everyone's sort of gotten the grips of the car, and, you know, they've been doing this for a while now, and he's had such a long break in between his stints in F1. And listen, we'll see what he can do next year in his first full-time season as a Formula 1 driver. All right, next up is the third RB driver of the 2024 season, and it is Yuki Tsunoda. I'm giving Yuki Tsunoda a 7 out of 10, and you guys are also giving him a 7 out of 10. Yuki Tsunoda has done exactly what was needed of him. He has outscored every teammate that he's ever been given, and he appeared to win what was meant to be a shootout with Daniel Ricciardo for a Red Bull seat. It did seem that these two drivers coming into this year were going up against one another to replace Sergio Perez in Red Bull, and he won. Yuki Tsunoda won that shootout. Daniel Ricciardo could not keep up with him, couldn't match his pace, couldn't perform to the same level of Yuki, and whilst Daniel Ricciardo was failing nearly every week, Yuki Tsunoda was scoring points near enough every week. And as I said, he won the shootout, but never got the prize. He claimed 3 7th place finishes in a car that performed below expectations. He was committed as ever. It was, I will say, more of a steady performance rather than a spectacular one, but it just wasn't enough to convince Red Bull, even though it had convinced the majority of people in the paddock and the commentary teams, the fans. It convinced everyone that he should be in that seat, but it just couldn't convince Red Bull. And I'm at a loss for why. I don't really understand it. I think he had a fine season. As I said, it was steady, nothing that was blowing me away, but it was, as I said, enough to convince me he should get a shot at Red Bull. And now, more than ever, especially after Christian Horner's comments, I actually believe that 25 will be his final season in RB. As a Red Bull team driver. I think it's I think it's ta-da, Yuki. Hopefully he can stay on the grid. But let's see what he can do alongside Isaac Hadjar in 25. It could well be that this is another teammate that he completely wipes the floor with and Red Bull pay him dust. Or it could be that Red Bull's thoughts and beliefs are if Isaac Hadjar can outperform Yuki Tsunoda, he then moves up to Red Bull alongside Max for 26. As I said when we talked about Lawson, I feel like Lawson is just a placeholder whilst they look at the younger talent that Horner seems to be fairly interested in and has been bigging up, Isaac Hadjar and Arvid Lindblad. I do believe that there is things happening within the Red Bull junior team that we don't yet know about. And I do believe that if Isaac Hadjar has a solid season, if he outperforms Yuki Tsunoda, he's moving up to Red Bull and it could be Liam Lawson's only year as a full-time F1 driver. But we will just have to wait and see. All right, now on to Williams, and we have Logan Sargeant. I'm giving a 2 out of 10. I'm giving a 2 out of 10. You guys have actually given him a 1 out of 10. When we did the mid-season ratings, I actually think I said everything I could possibly say for Logan Sargeant for his time in F1, because he only did one race after that and had a huge crash in FP3 in Zandvoort. And I can't help but think, why was he ever signed on for 2024? Listen, 23, okay, he scored a point, but it was by default, it was by disqualification. He didn't actually do anything to get those points. I don't know why they signed him on for this year when it was so clear that he was out of his depth. He wasn't ready to be in Formula One. He didn't have, I don't want to say he didn't have the talent, but he just didn't have it in him to be an F1 driver. I fully stand by that, sorry. He was out of his depth every single weekend. And I don't know whether Williams felt bad for him, thought he'd maybe improve. Maybe it was just his first season and then he would get better. I don't know what convinced James Vowles to carry him on into 24. But all it did was give him a terrible, terrible end to his Formula One season as he was dropped 2/3 of the way through the season. He went pointless again. It was a horrible season for him. I'd be surprised if we were to ever see him in F1 again. I think he's going to... He's signed on with Jamie Chadwick to do something. Is it... Elms. I think he might be doing the European Le Mans series. I can't remember what it was exactly, but he will never race in Formula One again. I don't think anyone will give him a shot. I do kind of feel like it was maybe going to be a Mick Schumacher situation where, you know, I don't think we'll ever see Mick as an F1 driver again, but it was a sad end to his Formula One career. However, I stand by the fact he should never have been given a contract for 2024. Never. I don't think his 23 performance proved he should have been. Signed for 24, and even if you look at the likes of Colapinto, who came in and had such great moments, it just showed how out of his depth Logan Sargeant was. As I said, he finished 23rd in the championship, 0 points. I'm going with a 2. It might be a bit generous. You guys have given him a 1, but that is Logan Sargeant. Next up is Logan Sargeant's replacement, Franco Colapinto. I'm giving him a 6. I'm giving him a 6 out of 10. You guys, the fans, have given him a 5 out of 10. Colapinto's 9-race cameo in F1 started off at such a high and ended at such a low. There was so much drama in his 9 races that you could have written a book. Replaced Logan Sargeant with an absolute bang. 2 points finishes in the first 4 races. Garnered a huge fan following. Rizzed his way through the paddock. Riled everyone up. Wasn't afraid to get his elbows out and make his mark, and, you know, brought so much interest and intrigue that led us all to believe he was on the verge of earning a Red Bull seat for 2025. There was all the rumours that Christian Horner had gone to James Vowles and was offering money to get him out of his contract. There was rumours that Carlos Sainz would then go to Red Bull to get Franco Colapinto into Williams. There was then rumours that Lawson would go to Red Bull and Colapinto would take his space. Honestly, it was mental. It all very quickly changed when a series of very costly crashes massively altered the paddock's perception of Franco Colapinto. I mean, you've got to think of Brazil, Vegas. He had 3 very big, high-profile crashes in 2 races. As I said, it really changed the perception around Colapinto throughout the paddock, and it does look like he has to wait at least until 2026. Well, he will have to wait until 2026 to try and get a full-time seat in Formula One. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think, you know, I've just done a whole thing where I've talked about fast-tracking drivers into Formula One spots, and I know it's the same as you just sort of Kimi Antonelli, who is a rookie in Formula 2 and has just been promoted into Formula One, and Franco Colapinto is also a rookie in F2 and, you know, would have been getting promoted into Formula One. I will say that we've obviously seen a little bit more of Colapinto. Obviously, he did 9 races. Kimi Antonelli did 1 FP1 session. However, I don't think there was any changing Toto Wolff's mind. I do believe that giving him a little bit of time to cook or mature in Formula 2 is not a bad thing. He can go back into F2, do a year, and then try and enter into 2026. And he's got every opportunity to do it. There is a few spaces opening, and I do think we will see him in Formula One at some point. I don't know when, but I definitely think there is a Formula One seat ahead for Franco Colapinto. If anything, you know, with everything from his good performances, when he did have good performances. I mean, he, as I said, had 2 points finishes in the first 4 races. He was either just behind Alex Albon or he was ahead of Alex Albon. His good performances were great. As I said, ever so slightly soured by a poor end. Amazing interest from fans, huge interest from sponsors. There was the whole talk when James Vowles said that as soon as they signed Colapinto, his phone didn't stop from Argentinian businesses wanting to sponsor the team. It's a perfect bow on signing that driver. As I said, I don't think that it'll be too long before we see him back in the sport. I'm happy to go with a 6 out of 10. I think I'll lock that in. You guys are going with a 5. I was swaying a little bit of dropping him down to a 5 just after I sort of talked about those crashes, but I'm going to keep it as a 6. Colapinto also finished the championship 19th with 5 points. All right, now the third Williams driver of the year, Alex Albon. Now, I'm going with a 6, and I kind of feel like I shouldn't really be giving him the same score as Colapinto, who only did 9 races, but I also think it's deserving. Yeah, I'm going with a 6. You guys are also giving a 6. It has been a very grueling F1 season for Alex Albon. Williams, I will say, in 23, Williams appeared to be on a sort of upward trajectory. Things seemed to be going fairly well. James Vowles had come in, seemed to be making the right changes, and apart from Logan Sargeant, Alex Albon was beginning to score points and it seemed to be on the way up. And 2024, everything just crashed down to earth for Alex Albon and for Williams. He appeared to become sort of bogged down in the team struggles. I think has been through a lot with that team, and it really dragged him down. And I think he also began to let his own standards slip. I think he went in on quite a high note, I would say. He was driving fairly well, and as the year went on, he went out, and it was poor performance after poor performance. 4 DNFs, all of them coming from accidents, and it just wasn't a great season for Alex Albon. Did finish the championship 16th with 12 points. I think in 23 he finished with like 45 points or something like that. He scored the majority of the team's points last year, and it's just been a bit of a fall from grace for Alex Albon. He is obviously going up against a new teammate in Carlos Sainz next year, which will ultimately define Alex Albon's future. Going up against Carlos Sainz, who is a podium sitter, a race winner, has driven at the front of the pack, and, you know, won Grand Prix and whatever. Coming to Williams only because it was probably the best out of a bad bunch. He's only there for 2 years, remember. Going up against Carlos Sainz will decide whether or not Alex Albon ever gets a chance at the front of the grid again. It is all or nothing right now for Alex Albon, and the pressure is massively on over the next 2 years to prove that he is capable of performances close to Carlos Sainz, because if he gets absolutely annihilated by Sainz, he's lost his chance at moving further up the grid, I'd have to say, unfortunately. So yeah, a 6 out of 10 for Alex Albon. All right, next up is the two Alpine drivers, our final drivers for this episode. I'm kicking things off with Pierre Gasly, and I'm going to give Pierre an 8 out of 10. Now, I think some of you may think that's maybe a bit too high. A lot of that is based on the final quarter of the season. You guys were split again. The majority of you going for a 6 and a 7 out of 10. I must say that 23 wasn't a fantastic year for Alpine. The team itself has gone through obviously quite a lot of struggles, and I would say that the majority of this year was thoroughly underwhelming for Pierre Gasly. He obviously struggled to make impact in a terrible car. The sort of, when I look at the beginning of the season, and I kind of expect that Sauber would have had the start of the year that Alpine had, but they actually didn't. The car was decent for Sauber. Alpine had the worst car at the start of this year. And listen, I don't know, there was obviously improvements happening to that car throughout the year. There was the news that his teammate that he's not a big fan of, Esteban Ocon, was leaving. He just came to life in the closing stages of the 2024 campaign. He had a superb race in Brazil, got a double podium for Alpine there. Absolutely brilliant. He then was able to have a sort of series of great performances in the dry as well. Vegas, a fantastic qualifying, unfortunately having to retire due to no fault of his own. He took 5th in Qatar, 7th in Abu Dhabi. He managed to secure that team 6th in the Constructors' Championship. I do think that I'm going to change it. I'm going to change it because the other drivers that I've given an 8, I can't actually give Pierre Gasly an 8 because of how the majority of his year went. I do need to rein that back in. I'm going to go with a 7. I'm going to go with a 7 out of 10 because I do actually need to give him better than his teammate. Going a 7. You guys have gone a 7. He did finish 6th in the Drivers' Championship with 42 points. And I hope that the trajectory that Alpine and Pierre were on in the final quarter of this year, they can take into 2025 and just keep that going, because I do like Pierre. I want him to do better. I want him to do good. And I felt quite bad watching him really struggle at the beginning of the year. So fingers crossed he can do better next year. So I'm locking in a 7 out of 10. And as I said, you guys were split between a 6 and a 7. Now, you guys were also split on his teammate 3 ways. Now, I'm going to give Esteban Ocon a 6 out of 10. You guys were split between a 4, a 6, and a 7. Now, Ocon's year has been fairly strange, to say the least. And his year has been fairly forgettable, with moments of greatness and madness. And there's 2 in particular that I'm thinking of. Obviously, his superb P2 in Interlagos in an incredibly difficult race with a superb drive, a P2. That is my highlight. And the other one that people will remember, that I think more people will probably remember than his brilliant Brazil drive, is Monaco. When on the first lap, Hülkenberg, Magnussen and Perez had collided, and just before the red flag came out, Esteban Ocon decided that he was going to try and overtake Pierre Gasly, his teammate, into Poitiers. A move that would never have ended well, and it did not end well for Esteban Ocon or Pierre Gasly, when Esteban collided with Pierre Gasly and sent himself shooting into the air and ended up having to retire. And then what followed was a very strange series of events, with Bruno Faman alluding that they were going to fire Esteban Ocon, that he was going to get suspended. And, you know, we left Monaco heading towards Imola, I believe it was, with loads of questions that potentially Esteban Ocon was getting sacked. He didn't get sacked. He continued driving, and it was as I said, a forgettable year with 2 highlights, one being in a superbly incredible drive, the other being a complete moment of madness. And I think there's one thing you can say about Esteban Ocon is that he is a notoriously fierce competitor, and I actually hope that a change of scenery at Haas will benefit him. There seems to be something with Alpine that people are either fairly happy to be there, Pierre Gasly, Jack Doohan, or people cannot wait to get away from it. Fernando Alonso, who I think couldn't wait to get out of that team and would have set the whole place on fire if he could. Oscar Piastri, who they weirdly announced as a driver for 23, and he was like, I haven't agreed to that. And he couldn't wait to get out. And then Esteban Ocon, who's been there for 5 years, is a brilliant driver, a fierce competitor, and he's actually, I think, quite relieved to get out of there. So hopefully he can do good things at Haas next year. Benefit from a change of scenery. And that is everything from us for part 1 of our driver ratings. We have covered 13 out of our 24 drivers. We will be back very soon to cover the next 11. Have a lovely rest of your day. Love you. Bye.